to the August 2024 coffee hour of JNIPER. We're excited to have you all here today. I always like to start with a little housekeeping. I'll try to keep this very brief. Meg will help post this again in the chat for those just joining, but we have a notes document where everybody should be able to contribute. This is to help capture our conversation today. Although I'll say we'll also be relying heavily on another tool called Padlet today, and I'll introduce you all to that when we get to it. But in the meantime, if you'd like to sign in on the welcome table in that notes document, that would be great. We also have pre-populated that document with some resources and links that we'll be talking about today. And you are all welcome to type in questions, notes, whatever. This is a document for everybody who's on the call to use. We're going to be recording the presentation portion of the coffee hour today, which will mostly be me talking, the presentation portion that is, but we're going to try to keep that pretty brief overall. When we go to more discussion and question and answer and activity, we'll stop the recording because we want to make sure everybody feels comfortable contributing. The recording after the session will be posted to the APS YouTube channel, and you can find recordings from all of our previous coffee hours on that YouTube channel as well. As you all know, we are using Zoom today. You can adjust your audio settings with the little microphone button or icon that's on the bottom of your screen. And you can also turn on closed captioning using the More option, which is 3 dots, and there should be a caption option under there. After the event today, we'll send a short feedback survey around. It really is short. We really appreciate any feedback you have for us because this is how we know what to keep doing and who to invite or who wants to present at future coffee hour events. And that said, if you're interested in leading a future coffee hour or contributing to any community resources, please don't hesitate to contact me. I'd be more than happy to chat about your interest, and we love when our members reach out wanting to present at these monthly events. So upcoming coffee hours, normally, as you have known this year, we've been doing the third Thursday of the month at noon Eastern. That it will continue to be the case in October and November. However, next month, we had to shift a few days. So it's going to be Tuesday, September 24th for 1 month only. We're shifting the day, but at the same time, we'll drop a registration link in the chat. We're going to have W. Brian Lane, who's an assistant professor at University of North Florida, talk about tabletop role-playing games. This is work in progress for them, and they're going to share how they are creating a STEM education tabletop role-playing game and are seeking collaboration and ideas from the community. So be sure to sign up for that. 2 other opportunities that you should know about. So GMAG, which is the topical group on magnetism, has outreach proposals open. They do this annually. They're reviewed on a rolling basis. This year they're due by the end of the year, December 31st. So if you have or know of someone who is developing an outreach and education activity related to magnetism, and you need some funds, consider applying to the GMAG outreach proposal award. We'll drop a link with some more information about that in the chat. And then for those of you who are APS members, you hopefully saw in your inbox a week ago that a proposed APS statement on public engagement is now out and available for member review. So APS has policy statements on many different topics, but they get to have one on public engagement. And so this statement aims to highlight the importance of effective public engagement and to urge physics organizations to actually value and reward public engagement activities. And so if you are an APS member, please check that out. The comment period is open for a month. And so we, at APS definitely want to hear from our members, their thoughts on the statement. So take a look at that. Okay. So I'm almost done with all the introductory spiel. And then I'm going to talk to you all about this as we've previewed in the advertising for this event, this idea of creating a culture shift in physics to have public engagement be recognized as a more essential or integral practice. I'm going to also tell you about themes from a from a small summit we held earlier this summer. And then what we really want to do today is get your input. And so we'll have some ways for you to vote, suggest ideas, reflect, and discuss with each other some of the action items that we as a community are going to focus on in the coming months and years. Okay, I know a lot of you know what JNIPER is, but there are some new faces. And so as a reminder, JNIPER stands for the Joint Network for Informal Physics Education and Research, and we're a community of practice for people who design, facilitate, or study informal physics learning activities and programs. Informal physics, you might also use the term public engagement or science outreach, but really what we're referring to here is a wide range of activities where facilitators and participants are mutually engaged in exploring physics topics with an emphasis on curiosity and excitement. And this comes in many different formats. So you can think of science museums, science camps, stargazing parties, podcasts, demo shows. Really a bunch of different formats fit into the umbrella of informal physics. And I like to remind us of the community's mission, which we've refreshed a little bit based on just how we have grown over the last almost 2 years. So our mission is to promote a culture where public engagement is an integral practice of physics in order to broaden participation in the physics community. And we have a long-term vision of a physics community where public engagement is fully integrated into the physics discipline, creating inclusive and equitable environments that will attract and retain a diverse community. And so how do we do this? We aim to promote connection, collaboration, and learning around effective ways to engage with the public on physics topics and around advocacy for informal physics education work. And we aim to have diverse voices represented in our events and materials. And so one of the ways we do that is through our coffee hours, our monthly coffee hours. We also have multiple communication channels, so a mailing list, a Slack space where we can share resources and ask questions and announcements. And we also have our website. This is pick your preference for communication, but this is where we will update you all on upcoming workshops, coffee hours, conference sessions, etc. And I always like to remind us that JNIPER is a global and international community. We have a community map, which we've been growing for many months now. If you have not added yourself to the map and you would like to, you can go to the link we'll put in the chat, and there'll be a little plus button on, I think, the bottom right-hand side of your screen, at least it is on my screen. You can put in your location and then just make sure to update the title of your little pin to your name because it will default to your location. So I wanted to, again, to help frame our conversation coming up, dig just a little bit into this idea of a community of practice, because we say JNIPER is a community of practice. So what is that? Communities of practice are groups of people who share a concern or a passion for something they do and learn how to do it better as they interact regularly. So there are many different ways you can participate in a community of practice, from being kind of a peripheral participation to more central participation that can change with time and with needs. And JNIPER, as a community of practice, what do we care about? What are we learning about together? It's public engagement with physics and how to advocate for it, how to effectively do it. How do we do this? We have our Slack space, our coffee hours, our workshops, conference sessions, building partnerships together. We have a fellowship program we piloted this past year. And who is in the community? A lot of different folks, APS members and non-members, researchers, educators, public engagement practitioners, science communicators, students. Anyone who's interested in public engagement with physics is welcome to join us in our community. Okay, so now digging into this idea of changing physics culture. So we laid out for you all in our advertising and some of the materials we sent you before this event that we as a JNIPER community are aiming to establish informal physics education, which I'll use the acronym IPE, aiming to establish that as an essential part of physics and an integral valued practice of all physics organizations. And so to start this conversation, although I will say this conversation has been going on in the background probably for many months now, but to formally start the conversation, this past June, we gathered 42 JNIPER members to discuss concrete steps for effecting this cultural shift. This was held at the University of Colorado Boulder, but it was just the beginning of our community's conversation on this topic. And as a community of practice, we want to make sure we're including all voices in our community. And so that's why we're here today, to expand the conversation to you all, to get your ideas and to begin prioritizing some of the actions we can take on affecting this culture shift. So a couple of goals for today's coffee hour. So obviously we would like to inform you of some of the themes from this small summit we had. We want to get your feedback on priorities for how JNIPER can help create this culture shift. We want your feedback on how to structure our community practice to support these priorities, as well as your individual actions, and to hopefully help you identify ways you can contribute to this, this work. So before we dive further in, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what would it look like to you for informal physics education or public engagement or science outreach, whatever term you use, to be recognized as an essential physics practice. Go ahead, think about that for a moment and type in the chat. What would that look like for you? And it could be just a few words of what does that connote for you? Part of tenure review, I see Sarah saying specific value in faculty evaluations. Yep, so that's similar from Brian. Included in a research statement in job applications rather than something you're worried about hiding. Yep, great, Kara. Part of the hiring process, faculty specialization within a department, courses at the college level requiring outreach, social media presence, training programs, support and recognition, not expected to do it on the side in annual reviews. Yeah, seeing a lot of very similar themes here, and you will see that also came out from folks at the summit, some of which are here today. Elective courses for undergrads. Yes, love it. Please continue to put your thoughts in the chat as I move on here, but I definitely will look back at the chat, so please type there. So at this small summit that we had, we were talking about culture shift and kind of structuring our conversation around 4 themes. So structures and organizations, community partnerships, stakeholder engagement, and research-based public engagement practices. And we were talking about these themes again with the strategy, the idea of developing a strategy for this culture shift that we want to create in physics. We are in the process, we will be in the process of documenting the conversations from the summit and our follow-on conversations today in the form of a white paper. But that takes a little while. And so we sent you all, and we will link again in the chat, a short report of just highlighting some of the themes of what was discussed at the summit, as well as really focusing on the action items that were identified. So we'll share that in the chat again, and I'm going to briefly review what that short report said, because that we'll use that as a launching point for our conversation. So one thing we talked about, right, is why change the culture? So like, why do we want to do this? And so one reason, which probably not surprising to anyone on this call, is physics is a rather exclusive culture and discipline. We can look at that in many different ways, from the representation of folks from different backgrounds being really not representative of their representation in the overall population. we can look at retention statistics and such. And so it's a pretty exclusive culture. When we ask people at the summit to kind of illustrate this, like what does it mean for public engagement to be essential to physics, and what is physics now? They depicted physics currently as like a steep mountain you have to climb, or a desert island that you're on. So those are very right, isolating images, but they identified informal physics education as really a tool to make physics better, right? More accessible, inclusive, and interconnected. So it could be the bridge to the desert island. It could be a gentle slope up Mount Physics. So really increasing the accessibility of the physics space. And we know from research that informal physics education plays a really important role in building physics identity. Again, helps with retention, it promotes trust in science, it encourages curiosity, which is really the bedrock, right, of all of science, curiosity and wanting to explore. So we identified, and other researchers have identified, all of these very positive reasons for why we would want public engagement to be more valued, more recognized, all of the things you put in the chat as examples of that recognition. And so, yes, it deserves recognition, funding, and a sense of belonging within the discipline. And so when we went through all of the notes and conversations that happened at the summit, we identified or grouped action items that were identified as kind of just generally what needs to happen to help establish informal physics education as essential practice. And I'll say, right, that this list is probably not, or I'll just go ahead and say not complete. I'm sure there's items that are missing. But one thing that was identified was messaging. So, oops, let me go back to messaging for a second. So stories and talking points that can be used with funders, departments, communities, people in power above you, people you're trying to collaborate with. So talking points and stories about public engagement, its value, and why it should be, why people should want to support it. That was identified, lots of different messaging angles there, but as a real need, a kind of communications plan that we all can use when trying to communicate with other people about informal physics education. And I should also say some of the conversations highlighted that, we don't want to necessarily come from a position of trying to defend public engagement, but more using this messaging as talking points or opening a conversation with folks about, hey, we know this is a valuable thing. Let me tell you, let me open your eyes as to why. Funding and a sustainable funding source was also a big theme that came up in terms of creating and or expanding these funding sources for programs. I know, I'm sure for everyone on the call, that is no surprise. That's something that, money talks and money shows value. And that's something that also came up in our conversations. Resources and training also came up, particularly around public engagement effective practices around the topic of evaluation and assessment, and around creating community partnerships or co-creating programs with folks. Again, as you all mentioned in the chat, rewards and recognition also really came up. We discussed how the current promotion and tenure models, both in academia and in other physics organizations, are not aligned with public engagement work, are anti-aligned, and so that would have to shift. We also talked about how promoting a partnership approach in public engagement, so partnering with our communities, with our local collaborators, with our audiences, is a more sustainable path forward in terms of kind of the investment of time and energy and the potential impact of public engagement. That rather than doing one-off things, promoting long-term partnerships is an effective approach. And data, so this also connects to all of the above items, but a lot of stakeholders, a lot of people who are we have to interact with to get support for public engagement, want data about the effectiveness of public engagement programs. But we talked about how this data, it needs to be both qualitative and quantitative. There's different data is needed for different parties, and that we really need to understand the motivations and goals of our different, people that we are speaking to understand what data they'll need. But some of the data that we identified being, needed is data on benefits for the facilitators or university students who are involved in public engagement. And I should note, some of this data already exists, but there's more that can be collected. Benefits for the university or the physics institution that is, running this program, and benefits for the audience or local community. And we also talked about how in collecting this data, that it's really important to also think about the methodology we use to be responsible and respectful of the communities we're working with, to make sure that we're, again, promoting partnership and trust and not undermining our efforts. And so then if we looked at specifically what could an organization like JNIPER do to advance culture change, we came up with a couple of potential action items, or I should say groups of action items. Culture change happens at many levels. There's individual roles, there's organizational roles, institutional roles. But for JNIPER, Summit attendees identified, while JNIPER could help with the creation of toolkits and training around informal physics education practices, the research and evaluation piece, the partnership piece, and also that communication and messaging piece. We could also potentially help collect examples of effective informal physics education initiatives and programs that have had success with culture shift. We have tried to do that certainly in highlighting that in our coffee hours, and I can name a couple of you I know who are on the call who would be great examples for us to make sure the whole community knows of. We can also be a connecting and collaboration kind of nexus, so facilitating those connections between, the 41 people on this call, right, between practitioners and researchers and communities. One of the big things that I think came out in our summit conversations and has also come up in our coffee hours is that people, for example, practitioners, really want to evaluate their programs or research their programs, but they need to partner with someone who has that expertise and that time and resources to do that. And so JNIPER potentially could help forge those connections. And we also talked about how could JNIPER help provide visibility and recognition in many different ways. So, for example, by organizing conference sessions at APS conferences or other conference spaces, by maybe publishing a community newsletter, like something that could highlight what our members are doing. This idea of, you might be familiar, APS has done kind of site recognition awards for different things. So department culture around its inclusivity. We also do historical site recognition, lots of different things, but could we provide some type of site recognition for really stellar public engagement programs? So that was just some of the ideas that were surfaced. We, again, know that there's probably more ideas you all have. And so now with that, I'm going to move us over to the Padlet. So let me stop sharing this and we'll stop recording as well.